Hey, this is Scott over at phasingplayer.com, and today I want to talk to you guys about how to play Matt Eklund's Pax Transhumanity. Now, back on December 8th, 2019, we did a live playthrough of this game, and I think it went really well, but we did get a rule or two wrong while we're playing, so if you tried to learn how to play the game from that video, I would recommend watching this video. Anyway, I have the game set up, so why don't we jump on in and see how it all works. Alright, here is the game all set up. Now, normally, these player boards would not be stacked up on one side like this, but rather in front of each player. I have them here just for the purpose of this video. Okay, let's look at the anatomy of an ideas card. They all pretty much look the same, with a colored strip on the left and right. In this case, it's a green strip and a blue strip. They all also have these impact icons on the left side. Some cards will have heat, in this case a black heat, but many also have a white heat that would be in the upper left. You can ignore any right side heat, those are just for when the card is commercialized. Some cards will also have surge arrows in the upper right, which is basically a free syndicate action to another card in that row. Some cards will have text in the center of the card, above the flavor. These are special abilities granted to players that have syndicated the idea in the market or taken it into their think tank. Note as well, this card has orange on both sides. It still has two strips, they're just both orange. Alright, let's talk about the 4 spheres in the game. They all feature the same aspects, such as the left side of the card being thinker work while the right side is maker work. They all also have barriers, which are these circles with stop signs in the center. They have 2 utilities, one on the left and one on the right. Those are those squares that are kind of bold. And finally, they have a strip on the bottom representing unemployment. Note that arrows flow down towards the bottom. These are problem chits, and they will grant victory points at the end of the game for players that have claimed them. And finally, the player's finance boards, featuring boxes for capital, wealth, and debt. It also has a helpful little chart of all the actions they can take in the game. We should also talk about how players spend money in this game. It will either be from moving cubes down on your finance board or selling patents that you own. The value of patents will depend entirely on the number of cards in the human progress display and how they match up to the 4 patent colors. For instance, 1 orange card down here means that any cubes in the orange patent area are worth 1. If there were 2 orange cards here, then that cube would be worth 2. So in order for the black player to sell this patent, he would simply take it and put it back into his wealth, gaining him $1 for that action. The way you generate money on your finance board is by moving cubes from the top down. You will always move cubes from capital first if possible, and then wealth second. So for instance, if you wanted to spend $3, you would move all 3 of these cubes in capital down to wealth. That would generate the money you need for that action. Let's say you wanted to spend 5. You would take 1, 2, 3, and then 2 more from wealth, knocking them into debt. Once they're in debt, they cannot be spent any further. You may also combine money spent from patents with money spent from your finance board. So let's say, for example, the red player wanted to spend 4 for this card. They could move 3 cubes down from wealth and then sell this patent for 1, returning it to wealth. Okay, well, why don't we talk about the fundraise action? Fundraise is the primary way you will be getting quick cash in this game, and expect to use this action pretty often, especially early on. So yeah, let's break it down. Okay, so let's say the red player wants to take the fundraise action. The first thing they would do is divest any agents of theirs out in the map. So that would be syndicated agents, agents covering barriers, agents in unemployment, or in patents. However, they could not remove their agents covering heat. So let's say red decides to remove this one, but decides to leave the syndicated agent on that card. Then you will adjust your finance board, moving an equal number of capital and debt cubes into wealth, and then moving everything in wealth up into capital. Okay, so let's talk about syndicate. Syndicate is like staking a claim on an idea in the market and is the first step towards commercializing. It can also prevent other players from taking a card as a think tank in research, which we'll talk about. So yeah, let's go ahead and explain syndication. You can syndicate any card in the market by paying the market cost. So if the black player wanted to syndicate this card at the 2 spot, they would have to spend $2. As mentioned before, money can come from your finance board or your patents. Cubes spent from the finance board are always taken from the top first, and this is the same when placing a cube. You take it from your topmost section. Additionally, if there is a white heat square, you must place a second agent to cover that up. So let's say black is going to buy this card up top. They would spend 4 from their finance, sell their patent for 1, and then place their highest cube onto that card and a second cube onto that white square. So that would be 1 from wealth and 1 from debt. They may optionally cover the black square with another agent. Note that heat does not cost money. If you are trying to syndicate a card that already has another player's cube, you pay double the market cost. So this example would cost 6 for black to place a cube on that card too. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about hiring. Hiring is a necessary action for researching and commercializing because both of those actions require that you expend workers. And hiring is how you get workers. So let's talk about hiring right now. Okay, so if the black player wanted to hire into the developing world, they would first have to spend 3 in order to place one there. Again, you always spend from the top down. You then take one of your cubes and place it into any legal spot, which could be an open barrier, a utility, or any company. So in this example, black could not place it here because pink already has a cube there. However, all these other spots would be perfectly legal. Note the utilities, these squares, can hold 1 cube of each player. If black hired into his own company, it would be a free action, but would still cost 3. All right, placate heat is a super straightforward action and is one of the simpler ways of removing heat from cards. So why don't we go ahead and check out how that works. When you placate heat, you simply remove one of your cubes off of a heat square in the market. You simply remove it. It doesn't cost you anything, and as always, the cube goes back to your wealth. Okay, so when I first learned how to play Pax Transhumanity, I had no clue why I would want to use the import action. It seemed simple mechanically, and it is, but strategically I wasn't really sure why I would ever do it. It turns out it's a great way to block players from getting cheap cards or to make desirable cards cheaper for yourself to buy. So why don't we take a look at importing right now? Importing a card is simply picking up one in the market and moving it to any open space in the market. So this card here could go over here, or any of these open spots. If, let's say, the pink player was the one taking the action, they could move this card here, and that's fine. Or instead, if they wanted, they could move a card with their cube on it, like this one from this section over here into 1 row over. They could not, however, move this, because while they have a cube, so does another player. All right, so let's talk about researching, which is the first of the 2 big actions in this game, the other one being commercializing. Researching is going to be a great way to get patents or think tanks, both of which will help things that maybe your opponents can't. So let's go ahead and break it down. Okay, so if a player wants to research, they have to research the bottom card in any row. So either of those would be legal cards to research. However, none of these would be because there are other things below them. So let's say this card is going to get researched by the red player. The first thing they're going to need to check is the barrier cost, which is going to be based on the number of uncovered barriers in that sphere. They also must be able to spend thinker work, which are workers on the left side of the placard. In this case, this worker is a thinker, and there are 3 uncovered barriers. Now, unless the worker is coming from a company or utility, the work is going to be unsubsidized, which means it costs double the number of uncovered barriers. Red now would have to move this cube down 1 level, making sure they don't go to a space where they are not legally allowed to go. So they were limited in choices on where that cube could go. Now, this card could be taken as a think tank getting placed on the bottom of your finance board, and that will allow them to commercialize a gold-orange card later, or it can be taken as patent cubes, either as 1 gold, 1 orange, or 1 of each. If they choose that, they'll take agents from the top of their finance board and place them into the patent area, discarding this card that was researched. Now in that example, they took an unsubsidized worker and spent double the barrier cost. To avoid that, they have to use a subsidized worker, which will come from a utility or a company. In this case, they used a utility worker, which has a little bar that says no patents underneath. That means this card can only be discarded for no gain or taken as a think tank. Okay, one more example here. Let's say this player uses unsubsidized work and has to spend double the uncovered barrier cost instead of just the uncovered barriers, and they're going to take this card as research. Well, because it has an opponent's cube on it, it may not be taken as a think tank and only can be taken as patents. That other player's cube will go back to their wealth. This card is then discarded. After a research action is completed, you will fill out that market row with new cards from the deck, going from the bottom up. Note that this is the only way new cards come into the game. If there are other cards in the market after research, they will slide down to the bottom of that row, and then you'll go ahead and fill up all the open spaces. Alright, so the big action in this game is commercializing. Commercializing is kind of your ultimate goal in terms of what you're trying to do repeatedly. Commercializing cards lets you take impact actions, and impact actions can do a whole bevy of different things. In addition, they'll increase the human progress splay and give you patents as well. So commercializing is a big action. It's kind of complex. Let's go ahead and talk about it right now. So okay, let's say Blue wants to commercialize a card. They need to pick any card in any market that they have syndication on. It doesn't matter if an opponent has a cube there, it won't prevent them from commercializing. They then have to check that card for viability based on the colored strips on the left and right, which I sort of mentioned earlier. There are 3 things that will dictate if a card is viable or not. These 3 things are cards in the human progress splay, patents that the commercializing player holds, or the top card in the player's think tank. If a player decides they want to use patents, they must have patents that match the card that they are trying to commercialize. In this case, it would be a green and a blue. Those get returned to the player's wealth. If they don't have matching patents, then they cannot use those for viability. The next option would be their top card in their think tank stack. They need to have a card that has the matching strips. It does not matter which side that they are on as long as they have those colors available. So here you would see that this green-blue card in the think tank matches the green-blue card commercializing. And if the colors were on the opposite sides, it still matches and counts. Finally, we have the human progress splay. What we are looking for here are cards that are adjacent to one another. In this example, we need a green and a blue next to each other, and we have that, which means that those color combinations are viable for every player. So using the human progress splay, we see that this card is viable for the blue player, and so they can progress forward. Next, you must spend maker work, not thinker work like with research. Now, exactly like in the research action, the player would have to spend the barrier cost. In this case, there are 3 open barriers, and so Blue could expend their subsidized worker from their company to spend 3 on this commercialize action. Once that cost is spent, the agent follows the line down to any open space. Next, resolve the impact actions on the left side of the card. In this case, it is either a maker company in the cloud, which would go on any of the barriers, or you can take one of your cubes from the pool outside of the game, placing it into your wealth. In this case, it is either or, not both. So let's say the player wants to make the company. They would take one of their unused discs and place it into any open barrier spot on the maker side of the cloud placard. Next, the commercialized card gets placed into the human progress splay, with the commercializing player choosing which of the 2 colors gets placed into it. Let's say they decide to choose blue, it would go in just like this. Then, any cubes that were on the card as subsidized would get placed as patents on the color chosen by the commercializing player. Heat now remains on the card as Future Shock, which will prevent other players from using that card as viability when commercializing. You also now must check the Cutting Edge, which is the 3 most recent cards in display. This may change the current regime of the game. In this example, 2 blue cards being in the most recent 3 means the current regime switches to this blue card that is going to change some rules that players will have to abide by. Okay, cool. So those are all of the actions in Pax Transhumanity. There aren't that many. Remember, you take 2 per turn, and you may double up on them, so you could hire twice or research twice, assuming you met the prerequisites for both of those actions. Now, the flowchart that the game includes, the little fold-out player aid, is super useful, but there are a couple of errors in it. The 2 big ones are in research and commercializing, which are unfortunately the 2 biggest actions in the game. But the research gaffe is at the very end of the flowchart. It suggests that you need utility work to get a think tank, and that isn't quite right. Basically, when you do research, you will either discard the card for nothing, discard the card for patents, or take the card as a think tank. Those are really your only 3 options. And you kind of decide on which one you want to do at the same instance. But the flowchart makes it sound a little confusing. Check the rulebook for how research works if you're still a little lost versus the flowchart. Know that the rulebook is right, the flowchart is a little wrong. Okay, so finally, let's talk about ending the game. These tipping point cards will have been shuffled into the bottom half of the deck. Now, they get added into the market just like any other card. However, they must be syndicated to research them. When they are commercialized, you'll perform the impact actions just like the others, and that bottom one is the game end impact action, which, as you can guess, will end the game. Another game-ending card is the plurality card, which is on the very bottom of the deck. It also goes into the market, it cannot be commercialized, and when it is researched, the game will end just as it says on the card. The game can also end when a player makes their 5th company. Every player only has 4 company discs, so when you're in a position to make one and you don't have any left to place, you just straight up win the game. No points scored. And the last way that a game can end is if there are 5 of the same color in a row in the display. Okay, well, that is Pax Transhumanity. I didn't get into the nitty-gritty of the impact actions because, honestly, I think that the rulebook does a pretty good job of breaking them down. So check that if you need to reference them as you resolve them. But if you enjoyed the show and this explanation or other videos we've done, consider a donation. Go to phasingplayer.com/donate, and there are links to a handful of different options that I've set up. You're certainly not obligated to donate anything, but if you do, it is greatly appreciated, and thank you very much. And thank you very much to the people that have already donated. It means a ton to me. Whatever amount you kick out is fantastic, and it goes directly into making the show better and paying the crew that has helped put our live streams together every other week. So if you haven't tuned into those live shows, they're up every other Sunday, and they're usually a ton of fun. They're pretty laid back, and we try to play some weird games. So come check them out if you get the chance. And I got to go make some lunch now. I'm pretty hungry. So I will see you guys later, hopefully on a live stream.